Welcome to Culture Talk. This is where we discuss culturally relevant topics and how you can use them to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with astrophysicist Jeff Zweerink. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Sandra.
We're going to be talking about what science and scripture say about the universe. And the reason we're doing that is because oftentimes science can be an obstacle for those who are not Christians. They just feel like the Bible has nothing to say about what they understand of science. So let's look at what science says about the beginning of the universe.
Well, actually, science does a lot to talk about the beginning of the universe. I mean, it's not a settled issue by any stretch, but you look at Big Bang cosmology, which is kind of the reigning paradigm of how we think about the universe. And one of the natural or logical outworkings of that is that there's a beginning to the universe. And that was a surprising conclusion that scientists actually kind of fought against for most of the 20th century. So science really, Big Bang cosmology talks about a beginning, and that's a very credible idea out there in the scientific community today.
So the idea of a beginning was not one that scientists were necessarily excited about. They wanted more of an eternal universe?
Well, that's what started the 1900s. That's what scientists thought, and it was through some developments through the 20th century that ultimately led science to say, yeah, let's go with this Big Bang model, and Big Bang models typically have a beginning in them.
So for those who are unfamiliar with the Big Bang model, give us a very brief description of what came from the Big Bang model.
Just this basic idea that our universe is expanding and it's growing larger as it is, it's growing colder. Laws of physics governing the universe are constant, and it started from some sort of beginning, and so that's where you get all the galaxies, stars, and planets as it cools down.
Time and matter, energy, all of that, everything.
Yes.
Okay, so that's science's understanding of the beginning. So then let's look at Scripture. What does Scripture say about how the universe came into existence?
Well, I mean, you start in Scripture, first verse. In the beginning, God created everything, if you will. And that's kind of reaffirmed throughout Scripture. In fact, one of these important Christian doctrines is the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, that God created everything out of nothing. And so the idea that the universe has a beginning is a very scriptural idea and hard to get away from that.
Right. And so, of course, then what we have in Scripture that was written thousands of years before scientists discovered that the cosmos began with Big Bang.
Yeah, and you look throughout history and there's just loads of worldviews littered with the idea that the universe has just been around forever. So that was something we kind of take for granted, but it is kind of a remarkable feature of Scripture that everything started and had a beginning.
So do we have examples in Scripture that point to the existence of matter and energy? Is it all contained in the beginning?
Well, that's what, I'm not a great Hebrew scholar, but my understanding of that Hebrew word, in the beginning, God created, that's that brought into existence. The heavens and the earth is a reference to the totality of creation. So yeah, we'd talk about space, time, matter, and energy, all of it. That's what had a beginning in the beginning.
So heavens and earth, a criticism from a skeptic, they might say, well, I mean, it's more than just earth and like whatever is around earth. So heavens is defining more than just like
it really is. It's kind of like, in some sense that's equivalent like, butterfly. It's not butter and a fly put together. It's butterfly has this meaning. Well, when you talk about heavens and the earth, it's talks about everything.
Right. So then what does science say about the end to the universe?
Well, that's an interesting thing. You got a beginning in Genesis, and in Revelation you have an end. And there's obviously apocryphal language or apocalyptic, not apocryphal language there. And it's a little bit hard to interpret what all that means. But what's clear is that there will be a beginning, or just as there was a beginning, there will be an end to this creation. And interestingly, when you look from a scientific perspective, no matter how we slice it, there's going to be some sort of end to this universe, whether it's a heat death, whether it's the fabric of space-time falls apart and the universe incinerates. There's some sort of end to all life in this universe.
So that's the scientific perspective. And is there any determination on what it will be, or it could be any one of these things?
Well, we know that eventually all the heat or all the usable energy in the universe will disappear, and so the universe will just die a heat death and all life will go. But it could be that the fabric of space-time will decay to a lower energy state and just incinerate everything that we see. So there's various mechanisms of how that may play out. It may be that we collide with another brain and everything incinerates. So there's many ways that might play out, but basically every good scientific model of the universe at this point has some sort of ending to it.
And then Scripture, let's delve into what Scripture says about the end.
Yeah, that's what Revelation is talking about, is that God's going to execute judgment. There will be a wrapping up of all things. It'll be a fiery, cataclysmic type death, and then there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And so that's kind of what it's exciting about Christian theology, is that this universe isn't all that there is.
Right. And I think that's what's exciting about just that comparison, that you see the beginning of the universe and the end of the universe. Both science and scripture are in agreement there. And that's fascinating, because scripture was written before these were even discovered.
It is. It's not like they're just going back and saying, well, how do we put that into scripture? These are things that people have talked about in scripture since before we had any scientific understanding of the universe. So the fact that science is coming along and developing models that validate what scripture says, to me, is a powerful pointer to there's a creator behind it who's both the author of scripture and the inspiration for the universe.
So how do you have that conversation with someone who says science and scripture are just not in harmony?
Well, I would just point out some of these things. So there's a beginning to the universe, there's an expanding universe, the order of events in Genesis 1 seem to match what we do. And if they still say, well, no, it just doesn't, so okay, so what are the things that contradict, and let's deal with those. Because typically there's something that person is wrestling with. And so, I want to give evidence of why I think it works, but then also deal with the challenges that they raise and say, okay, let's see if we can address those.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a wonderful tip to then not only just give information, but also ask questions. Thank you so much for that, Jeff. If you want to hear more from Dr. Jeff Zweerink, go to reasons.org and search for his blog, Impact Events.